up, everybody, and welcome to Haydn Behind the Music Stand. I'm your host, Patty Ryan, and with me is Paula Karolak, who is a freelance violist in the San Francisco area. She also works for a startup company, KAV, based out of Silicon Valley, and we'll be talking about her relentlessness and her passions in life. Welcome, Paula. Thanks for being here.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, Paula, we should have met a long time ago.
That's my funny story.
Oh! Well, do you want to share it with us?
I just think it's crazy that it took so long for us to finally be friends after the fact that we grew up in the same town, essentially had the same music teachers, went to the same youth orchestra, went to similar but rival schools in the LA area. And finally, it wasn't until we were in grad school together that we met.
Right. So Paula, so we both are from San Diego originally, right? We probably did overlap at Youth Symphony, except we just weren't in quite the same clique or something like that. I don't know why. Yeah. And then you went to UCLA and I went to USC. And then for our master's, that's where we went to San Francisco Conservatory together. And we actually ended up becoming roommates.
Yeah.
So on the show, I've already introduced two of the sort of originals of the Apartment D clan, but Paula ended up taking over Erin's room when she left. Cindy and I remember were just so excited for you to join us. No one except the people who inhabited Apartment D will ever really understand fully how much we bonded, how much we shaped our lives in that moment of time. I guess that's what people call college, right? I don't know.
Well, for me, I've moved to a lot of places out of necessity, but I moved there by choice.
Oh, thanks, Paula.
Yeah. Part of when I explain the apartment is mornings, what mornings look like with the three of us. And we more or less get up at around the same time. I will say we would wake up, have breakfast together, and drink coffee. And then as soon as 10 a.m. hit, for any listeners who don't know what 10 a.m. means, I mean, it has to do with sound ordinances about when we're allowed to practice.
Right.
And anytime 10 a.m. hit, we'd all sort of disperse into our own rooms.
Shuffle
practice for an hour and a half, let's say, and then essentially reconvene back in the kitchen for our break before we went back to it. It was very motivating to practice with you guys, and
we even played Don Juan together.
I know we're so nerdy. We would do excerpts together.
That was so much fun though. It made excerpt practicing way more palatable because like there are certain excerpts for orchestral auditions that are across the board for every string instrument. Don Juan by Strauss is one of them, and probably one of the most mainstream ones. It's one thing when you're practicing your one part by yourself all the time, and it's another when you can combine 3/5 of the string section of that music.
It sounds so obvious to do, but I think at the time we were so young that it was maybe the first time we were taught to play all the excerpts together, and that really helped inform me. The other anecdote I might tell people about Apartment D is the flip side is, once 10 p.m. maybe hit, we would all stop practicing and reconvene in the kitchen.
Because of the ordinance yet again, right?
Yeah, we'd have the cap on either end. And there was one night where somehow the evening started with pop music, quickly went into girl pop, and then somehow from Britney Spears, we started watching Janine Jansen play Souvenir de Florence, and it just seemed like the obvious choice after some sort of like empowering Britney Spears song to like...
Yeah, this is the soloist pop version of... I mean, Janine Jansen is a fantastic soloist, and like, I have so much respect. Her Britain Concerto is one to beat, although I think Augustin Hadelich is beginning to beat that. She has such a rawness, such a power, such something that you just can't even really like grab. And so when we're talking about star power and woman empowerment of a particular period of classical music and also a period of pop music, that's where the Britney Spears and the Janine Jansen can be bridged between one another.
She's just the best.
Yeah. Janine Jansen, put her as one of the top people to search for recordings of any violin soloist or chamber music recordings out there.
I think it's surprising to a lot of people that all of my closest friends have essentially been my roommates. And I can't tell if it's before we move in together that we're such good friends, or by living together we become such good friends. Well, it was my first experience in San Francisco living with roommates, and it's sort of why I'm living with roommates again, because it was so great and fun.
Yeah, we really clicked.
Yeah.
My funny story is actually our moving out story. So I decided to go to Rice University for another degree. And in deciding to make a move, I thought I could just leave on the lease. And then my other roommates, so Paula and Annabelle at that time, could stay on the lease and still have the apartment. But since I was the final person that was on the original lease, maybe they just wanted us to get out of there so they can do some renovations and then jack the rent up in San Francisco by $1,000. I remember asking. Yeah, they just said, nope, they can't live there anymore. So I unfortunately had to uproot my two friends as well, and they had to find housing elsewhere. But my funny story about that, which doesn't sound super funny, but we were all packing, and I was, rigorously throwing some furniture outside, like I had mentioned earlier, and I was maybe about 80% packed. We had to be out of the apartment, I think, 24 hours maximum, probably less than that. And I look over into Paula's room, and it's just a sprawl of everything, and she's just sitting on her bed, and she's like, Patty, I can't do this. I love this apartment too much. I can't leave. And I'm like, Paula, I know, but we have to go. To me, it was sort of like I felt like this mom trying to coax her child to accept this fate that I was responsible for. But the image was just so funny because I was just like, what? Like, how come she's not packed yet? How is she going to do this? But sure enough.
Still have those bad habits. I don't know how many people have been privileged to have been made pancakes by you.
Oh, no.
So every Wednesday, Patty would make pancakes for the roommates in the mornings, and it was something we really looked forward to. And there was a chunk of time where Patty wasn't around because she was traveling, taking auditions. And I remember she came back and had sort of counted how many Wednesdays she missed.
I did?
And you felt obligated to make that up. And I had to talk you down saying, it's okay. Like, we love them, and it's amazing that you do that for us, but it's not required to anyway. And that was kind of, I sometimes describe you like that to people who ask, like, how do you know this girl, or who is she? And I just like, she's my roommate, she's really awesome, let me tell you about her.
And you tell that story?
Yeah. I mean,
the story where I'm like force feeding my roommates.
Not force feeding us. We were willing to eat your pancakes, but
I have to premise though that these pancakes are not ordinary pancakes. These pancakes were very health conscious. So maybe almost too much so. They're quite filling.
And they have blueberries and chocolate chips and peanut butter chips, and
I don't remember that.
I do.
Okay, maybe not so healthy.
The only thing that was, when you did you have egg in them, or you just didn't have oil?
Yeah, I think I replaced all the oil with flaxseed or chia seed.
It was definitely chemistry. Whatever you made, it was sort of chemistry. You figured out, and they were awesome.
Well, thanks.
I feel like we can't not talk about the woolly pig.
Paula, what have I done wrong in this podcast to not talk about the woolly pig? I love that place. I've gone through basically everyone except Annabelle in apartment D, and we have not talked about the woolly pig.
I mean, it took us this long to get to it, shockingly enough.
The thing is, Cindy was actually it was either me or Cindy that was the originator of finding the woolly pig. So for the listeners, the woolly pig, literally a half block away from where we lived, was this amazing cafe, Vietnamese influenced. He had certain banh mi sandwiches and just the best bagels. It was the best place on earth, basically. And it was literally a half block away from where we were. The people were always nice. They remembered who we were. We were obviously regulars. I would literally, if I needed to travel anywhere, I would call ahead, pick up my Lang's bagel and go to the SFO airport and travel and have that as my meal. Because I was like, I need to take a piece of home with me wherever I go. Since I've left San Francisco, they've moved to the Dog Patch, right? Mm-hmm. So they still exist. They just don't exist in the Inner Sunset. But I have a few more things to say about the woolly pig.
Yeah, go for it.
I might have discovered them because on my search for my apartment, I was trying to find a restroom because I really needed to pee before this apartment showing that ended up being my apartment. And I ended up actually using the restroom in the apartment. So then I always think, oh, I claimed the apartment.
Oh my God. That's one way to put it.
There are obviously other things that went into that, and I spent weeks trying to find an apartment. It was not easy, people. And that was back in the 2011s of the time. Like these days, it's like near impossible. People were showing up in groups of 50 to see one apartment. Back when I was searching, it was ridiculous, you know? So that was maybe my experience with the Woolly Pig, was like just legitimately trying to find a restroom, and they didn't have public restrooms. Cindy, actually, I think I would want to credit her more, because she moved in and then the next day needed food, and she just went over there, and she was distraught just from the move. She was just really tired, and Lang, the owner, was so heartwarming towards her, so welcoming, and she recounts the story as the first time she ever felt that she was at home in San Francisco. Yeah. My final story about the Woolly Pig, there was one weekend where they got a city ordinance. They blocked off the block between 3rd Avenue to 4th Avenue and had a block party, but not the kind of block party from like your college days. This was like, they had this community affair where they had like a bouncy house for the kids. The Woolly Pig provided food. I think you could donate some money to help cover some of the costs. But it was like, I know Cindy and I were there for sure, because I think we happened upon it. I think we were walking back from the grocery store, which was not like a Whole Foods. It was no chain. It was like this Asian market that had just like the freshest produce and the cheapest produce. And I think we were on our way back, and we just saw that our neighborhood was having this totally innocent neighborhood-esque block party where everyone was invited, and there was such great food. There's some music, I think, going on, a bouncy house, as I said earlier, and it was just like, there are good people in the world. It was a great day.
I think a lot of people that move to SF comment how it takes so long to find community here, and the Woolly Pig was pretty much a commercial thing in the middle of residential buildings. And so it really was the closest thing to a community watering hole that people could go to and interact. And he only did more to facilitate that by hosting all these events and making that little corner of the inner Sunset feel like a neighborhood or like home. It rooted us for sure.
Absolutely.
My personal anecdote with the Woolly Pig had to do with years after I moved out of that neighborhood. At some point, I was stopped and looked at this stranger. And I don't know who said it first, but we just both acknowledged, you look very familiar. And I think he got it, which was not very long after someone said that. It was the Woolly Pig, and it was the owner.
It was Lang!
Yes. And I think he was on his way to do something, so it was a very quick, I was like, how are you doing? What's going on? And I had at that point known he had already moved to the dog patch. I don't know whether it was witchcraft or whatever, but the guy has charm and a warm person.
He is like the epitome of goodness in people. Yeah, like that's where it's just like these wholesome small business shop owners. So please, if you live in San Francisco, go and support the Woolly Pig, because they were rocks for us emotionally and I mean appetite wise too. They have amazing cuisine there too. It's great. Paula, are you ready for some Spitfire questions?
Yes.
Are you?
I'm never ready for anything, but that doesn't mean I shouldn't try.
Fair enough. Okay, Mozart or Beethoven?
Oh, definitely Mozart.
That was so much confidence. And then
That was hard.
Okay, Mozart. Shostakovich or Prokofiev?
Oh, Prokofiev, 100%.
Okay. Netflix or video games?
I guess video games? I don't do either.
Oh.
I deleted Netflix, and I don't play video games.
Okay. All right, moving forward. Basil or cilantro?
Oh, basil.
Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings?
Neither. I'm sorry. I kind of read the Harry Potter books, and then I've definitely never read the Lord or the Ring books. I've seen the movie.
Okay. From the movies?
Probably Harry Potter.
All right. Symphony or chamber music?
Ooh, that's tough. Listening or playing?
I'll leave that for your interpretation.
Let's say chamber music.
Okay. Coffee or tea?
Oh, coffee.
Favorite practice room?
Anything with a window.
Is there anyone in particular that's coming to mind?
I liked Paul Hirsch's studio.
Yeah. Shout out to Paul Hirsch, I guess.
Yeah.
That room was in the 5th floor of the conservatory building, the San Francisco Conservatory. Favorite professor shout out?
Oh, Mitchell Morris. He was a musicology professor at UCLA and very, very entertaining and very informative and very smart. I definitely had him for other classes, but I remember most notably taking queer and lesbian perspectives in pop culture. And it was all about how the minority culture experienced and produced art in the last century.
Well, isn't that so relevant today?
Oh, you have no idea. My whole degree is on gender identity or identity culture, right? But through music history.
Mm-hmm.
And the papers that I had to read about what it's like to be a woman listening to Beethoven. And you kind of read it with a grain of salt because you don't know how it relates to you. And the joke's been on me. Like, I can't believe for the last 5 years that everything that's been relevant has just been that kind of dialogue. So,
Right. Nice. Okay. Most transformative performance experience.
Probably Rite of Spring. In the moment, talking about that's always feels really good to play.
Yeah. Is there something about a particular version of that? Or what is it about Rite of Spring to you that kind of...
I think it's the right amount of dissonance without trying too hard.
Oh, compositionally.
Yeah. I like new music. I have always in the past. It's not something I do a lot of currently. It's right on the edge of the beginnings of atonality, but still really rooted in the classical aesthetic. It's a piece that I don't feel like orchestra members show up and are upset that they have to play. You know, like sometimes you'd see Beethoven and we're like, oh, not another Beethoven, or they won't like a piece. But this piece, I'm not sure that I've really heard anyone say, not this again.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. You know, I forgot to mention in part of the introduction. So after a long time of us not really meeting and sort of always being in the same river, so to say, we actually ended up meeting because of a new music ensemble.
Yeah, that's true.
We were thrown into the contemporary ensemble at San Francisco Conservatory together, and we were thrown into this piece that was wildly difficult to put together. Kurt Rohde, Axel Strauss was the violin soloist of this piece, and it's a really cool piece. I remember being really intimidated by you, Paula, because for me it was maybe one of my first experiences doing contemporary music, and you seemed to just know what you're doing the whole time. But since us talking about this moment, you've been like, oh no, I was so lost at the same time too, right?
Yeah, I guess polyrhythms are my jam, and I eat that for breakfast.
Except on Wednesdays.
Yeah, except on Wednesdays. But I think that's what I really love about new music. And that's probably what I also really like about Rite of Spring, is that your mind exercise, the confusion that you feel trying to figure it out feels really good to me.
Yeah, it's like a puzzle.
So, yeah, I like it a lot.
Next piece you'd like to learn?
I've never really played the Mendelssohn quartets. And so that was kind of my quarantine goal that I haven't done a very good job on.
That's right. You even reached out to me, right? About that.
Yeah. So I did learn one of the Mendelssohn quartets, and I played along with the recording because of quarantine.
Cool. You've survived, you've succeeded, and have completed the Spitfire questions.
Oh, great. Phew.
So, Paula, can you guide us through sort of your musical journey? How did it all begin, and where are you going with it now?
So I started music when I was 3 and somehow really knew that I wanted to play violin. I did it all through my life, and then I ended up going to college for viola. That was nice. I definitely miss violin, and I've been practicing that a lot lately as well. I've come out of the other end of school freelancing in San Francisco, and that's been really fulfilling because a lot of the freelancing here is orchestral repertoire. But I also missed a lot of other aspects of, I guess, using my brain, and decided that I wanted to expand. And I ended up becoming president of the board of Symphony Parnassus, trying to kind of get the other side of music and the administrative side. Now I'm working in tech. It is financially fulfilling in that music has now become like a really good hobby.
Mm-hmm.
I can't say that I get to play with really awesome people. I get to play music that's really awesome and can download whatever I want and start learning it.
I mean, music never leaves you, right? It's like riding a bicycle. You always remember how to ride a bicycle.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely took a 3-month hiatus from playing recently, which I had never done before, considering that I've played since being 3.
Right.
And that was also great.
So what did you learn from that period?
Well, actually, it's interesting at my engineering job just how often you're supposed to fail.
Mm-hmm.
And makes me think either I wasn't taught that in music school or I just didn't see that that's the path I should have taken in music school.
Okay.
Like it makes me even think back to how much pressure we put on perfection within studio class and how really studio class should have been a platform where we fail, and it's not. There's so much pressure to already perform, or at least for me to perform at a level there.
Well, may I interject? Because I feel like it's in my experience as well of a similar nature that any performance opportunity, or at least we're told that you don't know who's in your audience at any given moment. So you have to be at your best at all times, which is exhausting. And that also, to me, made it socially difficult because I felt like if I wasn't going to perform well, then no one would want to talk to me because I wasn't worthy of their attention.
It's crazy. Some of the thoughts that we can get sucked into. And I just spent the last 3 months running experiments at my company. And every time there's a conclusion, some of the times it failed and it completely failed. And a lot of times our starting point was just a shot in the dark where we just set a starting point and it was our best guess and it could have done well, it could have failed, but you had to let it fail because you weren't going to learn otherwise. We currently have a few interns working on projects, and it's really interesting too to see them present every week on their progress in a way that, again, I never really thought about in music because you're handed your orchestra set and you have a week to show up. And at this point, you're paid a certain amount because you can show up and do it on the first try. You can show up to the first rehearsal and execute it a certain way. And we lose sight of all the stuff before then, the progress and the mentorship of learning and building up the ability to do that.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk a little bit more about KAV and your work there?
Yeah, it was really, really random that I got this job, but it was presented to me as, hey, I hear you're a musician. I think musicians have really good hardworking qualities, so I think you'd be a good fit here. And after a trial basis, they offered me the job. And so I work with 3 engineers and we are creating a 3D printed helmet, hockey helmet actually, that's supposed to be a better, smarter way of thinking about how helmets are made and also manufactured for the most part since it's on a 3D printer.
Can you describe a little bit more about the difference or what the company's trying to do?
Yeah, one of the things that we kind of joke about at the office is the fact that our helmet's actually soft, and a lot of people equate safety with a helmet being hard. And the reality is you want something to cushion the impact, and a hard helmet would actually crack and not provide any energy management is the term. And that's hard for a lot of people to get that cognitive distance. I would say a lot of times that's the first barrier to understanding our product is that it's soft. And that's really cool. And it's cool to be around people who see that vision and are not deterred by that it's not the norm. And we do print it on 3D printers, so it allows us to customize the helmet for your measurements. So if you wanted a helmet, I would ask you to take certain measurements and we put that into the computer and generate a helmet based on what you've provided, and then I put it on printers and make you a helmet.
Nice. And you paint them too? And
I mean, we do everything in-house. It's a small company. So we did a soft launch of our product actually in St. Paul in March. We're selling the product and it's really well received for people who have wanted to see a change in the helmet industry.
Right. Yeah, I was there at that expo and it was really fun to go see you. Well, in general to see you, but also see the company and see what you guys are doing. So any hockey listeners out there, check out the new company KAV, K-A-V. I guess I just plugged it for you.
Great. We have an Instagram account and a Facebook page and a website. So if you're interested in learning more about helmet or the technology that we're building to build the helmets, then recommend looking it up.
Okay. Is there any other details in your musical journey that you wanted to share? Maybe where was the point when you thought you could do this for a living? And then when was the point when you thought that maybe you should go a different route? The transition points, in other words.
I'm not sure that I really ever realized I could do it for a living. I think the turning point was realizing that I was making a living doing this. And I think too, there's so much, music is so bizarre in its finances and how to make money, who's getting the gigs, blah, 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 that I didn't quite realize that I was doing well.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think I felt pressure that I wasn't succeeding because maybe I'm hard on myself. And I think that made me both realize that I wanted it in a different way. I love teaching. I have students. I love performing and I still perform. But I think having the job that I have provides me, I still get to perform in the evenings. I still teach on the weekends.
Right.
I still can rehearse during the day. What I missed from music was that at school, I was writing papers, I was reading stuff, I was critically thinking about music and playing pieces like Kurt Rohde and things like that. But when I got into the freelance scene, it wasn't that anymore for me. And the amount of Beethoven and Mozart symphonies that I kept playing over and over again made me a little sad.
Mm-hmm.
So I think now, the way my life is, every time I do get to play a Beethoven and Mozart symphony, it's now like, hell yeah. It's just so different. I get to show up and I think I'm so lucky to be doing this. I get to go home from work and play Bach. That's part of why I don't have Netflix, because that's what I go home and do, and that's really fun for me.
Yeah. Even though you're in transition right now, you're in between the music world and life outside the music world, is there any trait that you've honed in from being a musician that has applied to a lot of other facets in your life?
I think being in the pandemic, everyone in the arts is questioning their career choices.
Right.
And
I certainly did.
that makes me think about the saying of looking back on your life and deciding I wouldn't have changed anything about it. And I've gotten to this point where I think about that and go, well, I think I would have changed everything.
Right.
I could, except maybe how the role music played in my life. I kind of like all the struggles that I've had and how that's shaped me. And I'm not sure I would have gotten there without struggling. And that was, struggling to communicate clearly with people. And I hurt a lot of people's feelings because I had a very direct tone and I had a very determined or hard on people. And the feedback loop for that is so fast in music. I learned quickly and maybe not quickly enough to communicate better with people.
When you mean communication, you mean verbal communication or do you mean musical communication?
I think verbal, because I would push people to a point where they would do everything except storm out of a rehearsal. And I regret being that person. And it took time for me to realize why I was that person. And I feel bad about it because it's not really who I am, but it was how I learned to communicate. You're desperate to get people in quartets and whatnot to play with you. And we don't have an HR or anything like that. So
oh my God.
You have to, yeah.
So real.
For better or worse. Yeah.
Yes, for better or for worse.
I've heard horror stories that would have been dealt with amazingly if we had HR departments, and ways that it's benefited people to communicate directly and stuff. Mm-hmm. So that's been really good. And I think since then have rebounded a little bit and found my own boundaries and my tone of voice back to where I feel more comfortable communicating my feelings and thoughts without resorting to certain emotions. And that has helped me in a lot of ways, communicating with family and friends and stuff. So music's really helpful for that. Do I think I could have achieved that if I had the financial ability to get therapy? Maybe. We can only sort of...
Right. And also there's so many avenues to find that answer. There's no direct path for everyone.
Yeah.
Working in a chamber music setting is maybe one of the most humbling experiences anyone could ever have, because you're not only putting your voice out there, but you're also putting your voice out there for scrutiny and constant evaluation, good or bad. And I think that that's where you learn a lot about yourself. You learn a lot about your values. I mean, people call it choosing your battles, but sometimes I think that's even more crafty than that. It's more about learning about what your values are and what you're really willing to fight for and what things can be more managed.
Yeah, at least for me, I had one quartet for this couple weeks and a different quartet in that couple weeks. And so you don't get the benefit of someone filtering you because they know you really well. You're kind of communicating working with a new group of strangers every time, and you still have the same end goal, which is how do I communicate my idea, but you're constantly reevaluating how good you are at that and how to do it better because of how often you're working in a different team.
Coexisting, right?
Yeah. And financial margins are so slim that your like livelihood literally depends on you being able to do that.
Exactly. No, seriously. I mean, even orchestrally, that's a huge determination whether or not someone in an orchestra receives tenure in the orchestra, is whether or not they coexist well with their section leader, with their section, and with their stand partner, because these are people that are going to be in their lives for years if they receive tenure. And if you're not someone who's amiable, then there's plenty of quote unquote fish in the sea for classical musicians.
Well, it's funny. It's hard to talk about music when it has such a small part of my life at the moment, and not COVID, again, not knowing how soon it will become more of a part of my life or whether my choices are permanent. Part of my work-life balance that I'm trying to find is using my students at the moment to anchor me in music. I could go too long with not playing, and then I'll teach a lesson and remember how much I like that. I mean, this counters what I said previously about getting to come home and practice, and working from home or working remotely can consume you in a way. I think people are really starting to realize there's no reason for me to go to bed and wake up at a certain time, because the typical Monday through Friday, Saturday, Sunday, weekend concepts are like totally thrown out the window. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like personally responsible for ensuring that I get up at a certain point, that I go to bed by a certain point, just to keep some semblance of organization.
A regimen.
Yeah. And today I totally failed. I was so late to teaching my student. I had to text her that I was going to be 20 minutes. I ended up being 30 minutes late, and I felt bad because that was like one of the first checks of like, how well can I do my work-life balance? And, you know, she doesn't know how much I put on her, how much pressure I put on her to be a little like ray of music in my week.
Right. I mean, of course, that's like the value that you get out of your student, and she gets a completely different value out of you as her teacher. The past years that I've been able to be a teacher, it's really starting to dawn on me the interplay between what the student receives from the teacher and what the teacher receives from the student. It's just such a pleasure. Like, of course, as a student, you're like hungry for knowledge. You're hungry to just learn and be the best, and you have so much trust in this teacher. And there's times you have debates with your teacher too. They're like almost kind of an extra parent of sorts, my musical parents in some way. But what's special from the teacher's perspective is that everything that you learned as a student has purpose at the end of the day. Not only are you just giving back this knowledge base, but that you're also being those mentors, that support system. There's a multifaceted part of being a music teacher that is about not just the technical musical execution of what we do. There's a whole well-roundedness of pedagogy about mentoring, fostering these people's passage through life that music touches more so than I think any other subject.
It's one of the only degrees you can get where it's one-on-one.
That's also very true. Yeah.
It ends up being a really expensive degree program for any school to have because of the tuition to teacher expense. Compared to some of my peers here who didn't go to music school, you know, I have a lot of anecdotes of communicating and being directly mentored by my professors. Being able to interact and observe and shadow titans of your industry is insane. It got me to go behind the scenes of LA Phil and meet more people like that who shape some of my thoughts and views, and how you communicate on that level, and the amount of, you know, MacArthur Grant recipients that I directly, you know, interacted with is also just high. And then it has to do with that, where music is more or less a one-on-one education. And on that respect, you also get to see them as human beings. I don't meet my professor just in the classroom, but they're more likely to come and have lunch with the students. The hero aspect that I got to experience wasn't just the hero with the cape. If you want to talk about Superman, I got to know both sides of that. Right. And that was really, really great. I saw how well-rounded or multifaceted people are.
That's such a beautiful way of putting our relationship to our mentors and teachers in the music world. I don't think I could have said that any better. So Paula, are you ready for a break?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, we'll be right back. Welcome back from the break. So before the break, Paula, we were kind of talking about maybe some of the genesis of why I started this podcast, but also sort of our relationship to music and our relationship to this path that we did set ourselves out for. And you were kind of talking a little bit about how your general life mantra is just, if I were to quote your words, it's that you don't know where you're going, but you know how you want to go about it, or something along those lines.
Yeah, I know generally what can make me happy, and it's not what I'm doing that will make me happy, but how I get to do it.
Right. And so I think that's pretty informative about the topic that you wanted to discuss today, which was what I also paraphrased was your relentlessness in your passions. And of course, music is one of those, but you have a lot of other interests too, right?
Yeah, I think that I do. Well, I like fitness a lot and body awareness. And, that comes from music, doing Alexander technique and trying to remedy your body after a really long day of playing. And my back is not always the greatest. Muscles are stronger on one side. So I definitely work to balance that out. And that kind of work took me to yoga, which I do a lot of and I really enjoy. A goal of mine at some point maybe is to do yoga teacher training and take that even further. And I think that I spend a lot of my time now with this new job trying to figure out ways of being more qualified for it. I mean, mind you, I'm working with 3 well-seasoned engineers that are 20 years further in their career than I am. And I know nothing about what I'm doing. And it's amazing that they've taken me under their wing and trained me. And I also see it as an opportunity of, I basically do whatever I want. I just have to do it well and thoughtfully. And so that takes me to online classes and learning and pitching ideas.
Okay, so where to begin? So fitness, when did you start sort of noticing this body awareness and how to make yourself more physically balanced and fit? And then with yoga, was that something that you discovered in San Francisco or had you been practicing that before?
I've been practicing it before. I've always played sports, right? I grew up in a really athletic place. San Diego's very athletic.
It's quote unquote sunny every day, right?
Yeah. So I did swimming growing up. I played soccer, I played volleyball, I played tennis, and I didn't let go of that love ever. And when I got to college, it was a way of relaxing for me, is running. And at some point I did take up yoga, I think at the Wooden Center, or it's the gym at UCLA.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
thanks.
I think that it was called the Wooden Center after one of the basketball coaches. And I think that just stuck with me and kept with me. I do it all the time. Again, quarantine hasn't really been the best time for that. I've done a little bit more Pilates, but it's such a great physical and mental space to be in. I always, no matter how busy I was and didn't want to go and kept saying I had other things to do, I knew enough about myself and the experience that it would just take an hour, and after the hour, everything would be okay. And it's like 2 birds, meditating and exercise in one.
Right.
Pocket.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot with ritual in that way that is really centering, mindfully centering and physically centering too. What has been your primary source of that during at least the pandemic?
Yeah. So I've actually been employed through the pandemic, so I don't have as much free time as other people might. In fact, I work a lot, but when I can, I do exercise in the morning before work. And the idea behind it is, I think because of music and the sides of the bodies being a little bit different, that during the day, my hips get a little bit unaligned and I can feel it in my knees and my feet, even in my upper back, my neck. I don't know. I feel it everywhere, basically. And every morning is like a reset where I stretch my hips to make sure that they're open and not tight. Then I might go into some exercises with a resistance band to make sure that I kind of strengthen the muscles around my hips and my back to support good alignment. And sometimes maybe in the evening I'll do a little bit too, but that's been my minimum that I think I feel really good and much better about if I do that, if I start my day with that. And it's usually with coffee. If you're a roommate of mine, you might see me with coffee with my leg propped up on, we have a fake fire stove, and I just put my leg on it and try to stretch out my hips, and I'll be standing there for a few minutes. I'll high five you on the way to the kitchen.
But I actually just had this memory of you that you used to practice sitting on an aerobics ball.
I did. Let me tell you, I don't do that anymore, but that was exactly what I needed at the time. Everyone has their own experience, but I definitely clenched my instrument between my shoulder and my jaw. And what happened is sitting on the ball, if I did that, I would actually fall over.
Interesting.
So for me, it was a way to force myself to relax my shoulders. And I have so many other issues. Obviously, that wasn't like the fix for ultimate fix, but it did help that.
It was a good aid for that specifically.
Yeah.
For that. Yeah. I get that. Can I transition a little bit then to what you're talking about with your work and how, because you kind of already described that they kind of hired you knowing that you were a musician and knowing that you were someone that was going to be a hard worker, right? And that it was sort of under that premise that they thought you would be a good fit. And you've only proven to me, at least, that that's what you've been doing and that's what you're trained to do, regardless of whether or not it's in music. What music school did for you was train you to be a really good learner.
Yeah.
And one that would pursue more knowledge past the point of it's a necessity or something.
Yeah, they handed me a blowtorch on my first day. That was pretty fun. And that was kind of also how I described that job, where I showed up day one and they're like, here's a laser cutter and here's a blowtorch and go for it.
No safety measures at all, or?
Oh, no, for sure. We talk about that a lot too, but it's totally safe what I'm doing. That's not the unsafe part.
Okay.
There are other things that are unsafe. The laser cutter is totally enclosed. I think its initial first impact for me was, whoa, this is crazy. And anytime I do stick my hand in there, I'm a little scared, but it's off when I do that.
Right.
Yeah.
So listeners, don't worry.
I'm totally safe. One of my coworkers, when we were talking about this cut I make with the scalpel, he's always, and the first time he showed it to me, he said, cut away from the hospital. And so anytime I use a scalpel for anything, I always, in my head, he doesn't know this, but I guess, go cut away from the hospital, cut away. This is just a reminder. It's just seared in my brain.
Yeah. How often do you use a scalpel in your work?
Oh, maybe every day. Mostly every day.
I guess I just didn't realize that I just always imagine scalpels in hospitals. I don't ever see another practical use for them outside of cutting people. But
yeah, I cut stuff.
Yeah, fair enough. So you were saying that in pursuit of trying to help this company grow, and therefore you helping yourself to learn more about what they do and learn more about what you could possibly help them do, where has that led you down? What rabbit holes have that led you down?
Yeah, the company was described to me recently as a small company trying to do the job of a medium company. And since we are all responsible for everything and personally invested in this company, it is, if I see a need to accomplish something, then I go ahead and just do it. There's no one else to do it except for me. Mm-hmm. And so there has been a growth between me coming on to help with certain tasks and then starting to help with customer service and starting to help with marketing and things like that. So if I wanted to, I can try something out and see where that takes me. And just because of my personality, that probably also means that I'm going to find online resources to educate me to also be better at marketing. And what I know when we were talking about branding, I took an online class about branding on Coursera.
This was of your own volition. This was not directed by your employers.
No. And it's not that I've never not wanted to do that. I love being able to be at the table and be part of these discussions. And I just didn't get to go to business school like someone else did or work at Google like someone else did. And I'm new to it. I can be part of the conversation. They just, through experience, know more than I do. And the way I can meet them is by educating myself on my own time.
Right. You put yourself through your own training.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty rare. Not a lot of people would, most people would go home and either play video games or Netflix or some other, version of relaxation after a long day of work. But I guess what you're telling me is that it's sort of your hard concerted effort of of trying to qualify yourself and be equal to their expertise level, or if not even more so, to be an asset to them.
Yeah, I see it as an opportunity that I don't want to squander.
Well, the other thing, though, Paula, is that, I mean, there's a lot that's changing based when we're speaking marketing wise, right? That there's a lot changing seems like every quarter or something, quarter of the year.
Yeah.
So is it difficult to kind of sort of maintain or keep up with the knowledge that you're already learning, but then saying, oh, well, there's this new thing that's coming out, or let's even say there's this pandemic that comes out and that disturbs everything. I mean, what is that experience like?
I think the way I'm going to describe it is the other thing that I've learned about engineering that I don't get from music is also how long it takes to do something.
Okay.
And so you say that and I go, that just means you have to spend a little bit longer doing something.
Mm-hmm.
And there's like a push for me in music to learn something quickly or learn it by a deadline. And that's kind of like the whole, like we are so deadline oriented with concerts and having it to a certain level.
Sure.
That I think we forget process too. And watching people who are less concerned with deadline as they are with process, because product is the deadline, or it's just like a different type of deadline. It just reminds me, and it gives me a reminder that things take a long time, and I don't ever allow that space for myself where I can. I just haven't. So yeah, marketing changes. I think what's hard is navigating the political atmosphere with a company that's not really your own.
Mm-hmm.
I'm part of it, but it's not mine. And this is just true of the bigger the company is. You're contributing, but also not to this narrative that they've put forth, whether it's positive or negative. And we're seeing a lot of that lately with people getting fired for opinions or companies getting slammed for opinions and people who can't put certain companies on their resume because the company did something bad. And it's maybe been happening, but it's now on the forefront. And so that to me is the hardest thing to navigate.
Mm-hmm.
Finding things to say is not as hard as finding the right thing to say at the right time.
Right.
Yeah.
So you mentioned to me earlier that you might want to talk about coding. Is that out of this passion of trying to help this company?
Yeah, that's part of it. I actually been doing it for a while before I even had this job. And
why?
Why?
Mm-hmm.
Because I've been trying. I've wanted something different for myself for a long time, and maybe because of the people I knew, it just seemed like a available path forward. And I found some online resources and started teaching myself. And it's taken a little bit of a backseat and been back in the front seat and so forth, depending on my time. And again, there are projects available to me at this company if I wanted to do them based on the skills that I have. I guess we're kind of like a quartet because there's 4 of us.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
And I can and I want to show up in the best way possible. It's also a really interesting field. You might say, like, we might have a conversation and you ask me why I like chocolate. And I say, I don't know. But for a computer, there's no, I don't know. Whoever codes it has to very, very methodically put in the thought process. And so I'll find myself thinking like a human sometimes, or like thinking not specifically enough when I code and the code doesn't work. And I realize that, oh, I forgot to say this really obvious thing because I take for granted as a grown adult that I don't have to think about these certain things. Mm-hmm. And so it's just, I don't know, it's like a really weird way of thinking that I find fascinating.
Has it changed the way that you process yourself in the morning or, make decisions for yourself?
Not yet.
Not yet? Okay.
I actually really want it to. I see that and I go, that's a really fun way of thinking about things. Mm-hmm. And say what you might about tech culture. I'm going to separate them. I'm not thinking about anyone else but myself in this moment. And I see the coding and I think that's so cool.
Yeah.
Have you done anything like that before?
No, I haven't.
Yeah.
I've only thought about it for this idea of more financial stability, but I guess there's a part of me that's telling me that it's not speaking yet to me in the cards, that I still feel like I should fight for my career in music before jumping ship.
Yeah. I guess we're just in such a bizarre time, right? that we're everything we thought we've known for a while that our systems don't really work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the way we think about things doesn't work, but it's really come to the forefront in the last few months. And we'll see what happens in like a year or two based on the changes that are happening now.
All right, I'll go to my final two questions for you, Paula. What, in your opinion, is the most common misconception about classical music or classical musicians?
Biggest misconception about classical music is that people think they won't like it, that it's boring.
Why do you think that there's that stigma?
Well, this is going to sound really nerdy. I think people want to have multiple sensory experiences, and that's why the best way that the symphony has been able to do that up until maybe 4 or 5 years ago is to do more visuals during concerts. And now you're going to see more concerts in bar settings and things like that because people want food, people want to be moving around, listening to music, or to include dance. I think it's both, right? Like there are times where I want to sit and listen to a piece and not have anyone bother me. I think as every time there's a disclaimer that says, don't talk during the performance or distract the musicians or whatever, I'm like, it's not really for the musicians. Like when I'm performing, I feel like I'm in the zone and I don't actually notice that, but I notice it as a listener and that bugs me.
Mm-hmm.
But I hear people listening to techno, electronic music, and I like that stuff too. But I go, really? Like you like this and not like some of the great symphonic repertoire?
Right.
That's
right.
just so crazy, and it's so moving and powerful and has so many different emotions and crazy backstories and stuff like that. I think that's wild to me that people think that they're not going to like it or that it's boring.
I hope listeners will really understand that importance to that answer. Because it's like, why do you expect to not like classical music? Because your grandma listens to it? Because it's the background music in a reception? Or, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, It's weird that it's not more accessible in that way. On the get-go, it's already considered this niche, this like, oh, you're probably not going to like it. You're not going to understand it. Give it a shot.
Yeah.
Go listen to The Rite of Spring by Stravinsky.
Yeah.
Anyway, and the final question is, you kind of started to answer this on your own, but here it goes. After all the impact that COVID has done to classical music, what do you think is something positive that will enhance and carry on in that world?
I think accessibility to music will change. I know this is true of all genres of music and how they connect people, right? And part of music has relied on experience, and that experience meant big crowds and big laser shows, but classical music audiences and classical music can offer, it's like the right kind of music you want to be listening, I think, during these times. And typically you would have to go, at least here in San Francisco, or in my experience in Los Angeles, or even in San Diego, get in a car, drive to the most densely populated area, find parking, pay for an expensive ticket, sit down in a hall where you can't move. And now we're given this opportunity to...
Or you can't even cough even, right?
Yeah, right. So now I feel like there's this new opportunity of reaching audiences far and wide that we haven't been able to before, or it's been available. I mean, the Met's been streaming and Berlin's been streaming, but maybe that wasn't the way people thought they wanted to consume. And now that enough people have been decided, I hope enough people have decided that they like consuming this way, and that will continue.
Sure. Yeah. That's well put. So, Paula, is there anything that you want to promote, plug? How can we reach you if you have any platforms you want to tell us?
Yeah, I mean, find KAV, check it out. I think it's a really cool thing that we're trying to do and help kids not have concussions. And in my own personal life with music, you can find me at Symphony Parnassus as well. It's this really wonderful orchestra in the Bay Area where amateur and freelance musicians come together and rehearse under the baton of Steve Paulson. It's previously the UCSF Orchestra, but in the last decade it's found its own wings, and they perform in the Bay Area promoting local soloists and composers. So it's a really fun thing.
Nice. Is there a handle that we can find them at?
Yeah, we have a Facebook page and a Twitter page and an Instagram page at Symphony Parnassus.
Nice. And if you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, please subscribe and leave a positive review on Apple Podcasts. It helps this podcast reach more people. You can also give feedback at our email, haydnmusicstand@gmail.com. Sharing with your friends and family is also a free way to support this podcast. And if you would like, you may also visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/haydnmusicstand. You can find us on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Podcast, and Stitcher, and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all at Haydn Music Stand, to access more content. Thanks for being on the show, Paula.
Thanks, Patty.
Yeah.
I love what you're doing.
Oh, thank you. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. Sushi, say bye.
Like, as soon as I talk about it, everything just explodes in my brain. It's like a flood of thoughts about what we just said.
Is it okay that I'm asking these questions, or is it?
Yeah, no, for sure. It's, it's like therapy.